It is my great pleasure to say that we are pleased to welcome back our guest speaker and my good friend, Kevin Hauber. And he spoke here a couple years ago and has been a regular speaker at Unity in 5 Cities, Pathway Religious Science, Circle of Spiritual Enlightenment, and recently at the Unity Church in Cambria. So please, help me welcome back Kevin Hauber.
So I've had people question it before, so I'll just clear this right up front. Kristen, my wife, sits in the back because she's kind of my energy watcher for what's going on in the room. And if I'm going too long, she starts giving me the the cut signal. So, just watch for that. It's all part of the choreography. Okay, so this morning we're going to talk about giving and receiving because in my experience, everybody has one of those that they deal with in some form, if not both. So we'll just kind of do a brush up on that and take ourselves to whatever the next level is with it. So I'm going to start out with a quote from Richard Rudd. Richard Rudd, for those of you who don't know, he's the one that wrote the Gene Keys, which is this wonderful treatise about how we are wired and what wants to come through us naturally. So I highly recommend that to you as some source material. But here's the quote that I want to share. Giving and receiving are the physical manifestations of our breath patterns. Only when you have enough for yourself can you truly give without expecting anything in return. Sometimes the most appropriate form of giving is silence. You have to be honest with yourself. If you feel that you're not being nourished enough, then you have to learn to give more to yourself. When was the last time you got advice like that? Giving does not only travel from the center to the periphery, but from the periphery to the center also. Rest is an example of giving to yourself. There's a good starting point, especially on a Sunday. These are very important lessons to learn. I love the way that frames this idea of giving and receiving as being like our breath. And using that analogy, imagine inhaling but not exhaling. Not for long, right? and conversely, imagine exhaling but not inhaling. That doesn't last very long either. There is that training that we can do for ourselves to be able to hang out momentarily at the top of the breath and the bottom of the breath, that whole box breath idea, which is a wonderful form of meditation, but it's all still part of that flow of giving and receiving. And that is the most basic, the most natural form of giving and receiving that we practice. I think you get the idea, right? Okay, so let's expand on that. So do you remember the old saying, or has anybody ever hit you with that old saying about it's better to give than receive? Remember that whole guilt trip? Yep. How about give until it hurts? Yeah. So I want you to juxtapose that today with how can you give from an empty cup? How can you give from an empty cup? So we're going to look at that one and talk about that today. And I hope this is one of those things that sparks lots of conversation afterwards and that you're talking about it when you go to lunch and all that kind of stuff. So I realized when I saw the Richard Rudd quote that it had been a while since I took a look at the prosperity subject, and so it was time to go back and dive into that. And I don't know about you, but Kristen outed me. I've been a lifelong, started in the Church of Religious Science in San Diego, and then Unity in San Luis Obispo, and when Unity split there, 5 Cities and Cambria and Santa Maria, So lots of new thought stuff over the years, and this whole prosperity idea comes up again and again and again. So for me, it's an evolving subject. It's something that I feel like over time we all learn to internalize at higher and higher levels. So let's enter the discussion about that evolution for today. And I can't think of a more relevant issue to talk about than giving and receiving and prosperity in general, because that is a subject that touches deeply into our relationships with ourselves, our parts of ourself, into our relationship with God, into our relationship with each other, and to everyone and everything that's precious for us. So I'm going to start with a couple observations. First, we live in a time of the greatest material and technological prosperity on the history of the planet. Would you agree? Now, you may not agree with how those resources are being used. I sure have my issues to work with on that. But nonetheless, we have the greatest resources available to us ever in the history of humankind, and usually right at our fingertips. The amount of information that we have available when we wake up in the morning right at our fingertips is staggering compared to any time in history. Numbing, in fact. Live that one? So one of the greatest challenges that I experience every day is how to sort through the incoming stuff. All of the information, which usually involves somebody wanting me to buy something. Come on. How many times a day do I hit delete? It's probably hundreds. And I have a feeling you're probably in the same boat. So again, unparalleled in the history of the world. There's a lot to work with there. So with all of this mass of information and all of these resources that are available to us at our fingertips, why do so many people feel challenged so much of the time when it comes to prosperity? Good question, huh? We've obviously got a lot. We have the best of everything available to us, including the teachings that we get right here and in places like this everywhere. Yet integrating that goodness into our lives can still be really challenging. Are we in agreement so far? Yeah, okay. So, is that because there is someone out there trying to get us? Ever heard that one? They're just going to get you. I've heard that in so many forms, and that just gets pumped into us. Or maybe, is it someone or something in here that we might unconsciously allow to get us again and again and again? Now, there are certainly forces at work in the world that would try to be deceptive and manipulative and for their own means and so forth. But we get to choose how to receive and experience any of that kind of stuff. Now, could the negative judgments that we acquire over a lifetime affect the flow of prosperity in our lives? You bet. You bet. Now, could the attitudes, the conditioning, the shame and guilt that we grew up with have anything to do with our perceptions about prosperity today? Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. In the past, I'm sure you, like I, have had discussion and been open to the idea about sponsoring thoughts or even limiting beliefs as the underlying messages that have tremendous emotional impact for us in what we bring into our lives around this subject of prosperity. So let's try something on and take on a big one to chew on for a bit. So, if I say that money is the root of all evil, does that create a trigger for you? Despite the fact that that's a misquote, right? Because the actual quote is that the love of money is the root of all evil. But it is so pervasive in our history, in our culture, this idea that money is the root of all evil, that it starts to ring really familiar, doesn't it? And so I'd like to have you take a look at that one. I want to share a viewpoint with you that money is nothing more than a tool of prosperity, and only one tool at that. Money does not exhaust the subject of prosperity, does it? It is one aspect, because prosperity comes in many forms. Those of you who have ever done the 4T prosperity course, one of the first things that's done is to teach the mantra, I am prosperous. And that's not just about money. That's about a lot of things in life, including health, including happiness and joy and relationships and money. It's about all of that. So the next time that you're confronted with a money challenge, ask yourself, what other forms of prosperity are blessing me in my life? Because we tend to get focused on these issues, and the one piece becomes everything, right? Whether it's a health issue or a money issue or a relationship issue or whatever it is, the one part becomes everything. So it brings up an interesting point. Have you ever been around people either here or in another country who on the outside don't have very much, yet they are really happy and generous? What does that say? To me, it gives pause to say, wait a minute, why am I struggling so much with this? Why am I choosing to be in struggle around this issue of prosperity? Have you ever asked yourself that? So I would also observe that we live in a culture that reinforces the whole bigger is better idea and the more, and all those kinds of things that a lot of us have taken a look at square in the eye and said, no, that's not the real story. That there's more to the story than that, and that there's that voice that speaks inside of us, or maybe even sometimes we get the voice that comes from outside of us that says there is more that's going on, that is real. So how do we make ourselves more ready and in the flow of prospering ideas that the universe has to offer? That's, to me, a great question. Now, those of you who know me know that my favorite poet is the Sufi poet Hafez. Okay, so I can't go very long without a Hafez poem. It's just, sorry, this is what I do. So anyway, here's a poem by Hafez titled Manic Screaming. He says, we should make all spiritual talk simple today. God is trying to sell you something, but you don't want to buy. That is what your suffering is. Your fantastic haggling, your manic screaming over the price. Yeah. So what is God trying to sell us? And what's the price? So I believe that at the deepest level, we all just want to feel safe and secure and loved and at peace. And if we can have that, a lot of the rest of the illusion, a lot of the veils start to fall away. And we get to experience life for what it really is. It's that security of being held by God that we all crave. You know what I'm talking about, right? Yeah. So now the price is giving up our smallness, giving up our not enoughness, our victimhood. There's a whole lesson in itself that we'll probably do at some point. So we have to break through our fears and start to give what we want to receive. That's part of that cycle of giving and receiving. Joy is not found just in being filled up, but it's in overflowing and sending it out into life and out to others. Luke 6:38 says, "Give and it shall be given you, for the measure you give will be the measure you get back." So, a couple things to notice there. This is classical mystical paradox. And it's true, but notice that it does not say that the way that you give is the way that you will receive. A lot of us get locked into this idea that I sow in this field and that's exactly where I will reap. Doesn't work that way. Life is a much larger context, and it can be really frustrating to put a lot of love and effort into a relationship or a job or a project and get seemingly nothing or very little in return. So I'm reminded in this that Sadie Blanton used to tell me that expectations are premeditated resentments. I really, so if I expect that my good is going to look like this and it doesn't show up like this, guess what? Resentment. And it's not a good idea to run around in resentment. Resent, the root word for that is sentir, which means to feel. And to resent is to feel again. So you're feeling something again, some negative thing. And usually it's from way in the past and has nothing to do with what's going on right now. And we're just bringing it forward. So consider that one. Now, the law of giving and receiving teaches us to give without expectation and hence without resentments, because that puts us into the flow. And that takes a lot of practice, doesn't it? Because we tend to get trained around, well, this is what I do, and that's what I get, right? It's the contractual kind of mentality. Old Testament even has some of that contractual kind of stuff in it, right? But that's not life. Life is far beyond contracts. So when we can let go of our expectations, even for a moment, we'll begin to see, and the wonder of the process will open up for us. Unexpected good is the term that gets applied to this a lot of the time, isn't it? Except that, from my perspective, why don't we expect unexpected good more often? And just open ourselves to the fact of what it might look like. Rather than expecting things to be so narrow. So, there's your paradox to work with for the day. Expect your unexpected good. Next issue. Seek ye first the kingdom and its righteousness, and all of these things shall be added unto you. Notice the order. Jesus does not say, gather up all of this stuff and then you'll find your way into the kingdom. Remember that old quote about it's easier for a camel to get through the eye of the needle than it is for a rich man to get into heaven? Do you know the context of that? The context, the eye of the needle was a gate in the wall in the old city of Jerusalem, and it was very narrow. And a camel, very heavily loaded, could not get through the eye of the needle. So they had to shed their baggage to be able to get through the eye of the needle into Jerusalem, the place of peace. So maybe we have to shed some of our baggage. Maybe we have to shed some of our expectations. How do we practice that? Okay, so let's look at the way that Jesus did that. When Jesus was confronted with the 4,000 or the 5,000 or the multitude, or depending on what book you want to be quoting from, he looked up and he thanked God and affirmed that he and everyone would be provided for. But he looked up. He didn't look down and go, "Oh my God, what are we going to do?" That happens once in a while, doesn't it? Yeah. And everyone was taken care of. Now, some of you are probably really good at this, in the process of just getting dinner onto the table every night, but there are others of us that's just more of a mystery and seems like a big deal. But occasionally we get it the other way around, where we go scurrying around and providing ourselves and then occasionally give thanks. Remember, Jesus looked up, he gave thanks, and said, "I know that we will all be provided for." And it was all fine. Everyone was taken care of. So now the form that we expect our good to show up in is important. We've talked about that a little bit, because a lot of times I find that my expectations for the form that things are going to show up in are a limiting belief for me that I have to work with. God typically tries to do me one better, and I just have to be able to perceive that. Have you ever had that one? Where it's, I can't believe I didn't see this before. And it was right in front of me all the time. Now, the amount that we give in any given situation is another thing to look at in this process. In, again, the Old Testament, Malachi says give 1/10 into the storehouse. That's the old tithing principle, right? So 1/10. But aren't we moving beyond Old Testament thinking? Aren't we looking more in this flow, just like moving beyond the Old Testament thinking of an eye for an eye and a tooth for a tooth into the love your neighbor as yourself kind of a frame of mind? That's the kind of evolution of consciousness that we're talking about in giving and receiving also. So here's the best rule that I've found around this, and I'm just going to, this is just Kevin's rule. This isn't anything universal by any means, but put your energy, i.e. give, where you want to see your life's energy increase in the measure that you want to see it increase. Consider it like an investment. I'm going to invest my time and my talent and my treasure into the things that I want to see grow in my life. Now, generally speaking, that doesn't include insurance. So I really try and minimize what I spend on insurance, and I try and maximize what I put time and effort and money into in other ways. Another way to look at it is to say, put your time, effort, money where you see the work of Spirit being done, and to do that consistently. That's not limited to church, but it includes that and applies to so many things in life. So what choices do you have today about that kind of investment that you're going to make? Well, What conversations are you going to engage in and put your energy into? What are you going to do? What are you going to eat when you go for lunch, and who are you going to do that with? What are you going to invest in there? What do you want to read? How do you want to spend time this afternoon? You're investing all the time. And again, it is not just about money. So give where you want to see that investment grow. I've been doing some reading and some study about inherited family trauma. Sounds heavy, doesn't it? Inherited family trauma. Ever heard the term epigenetics? How our very gene structure gets changed by the experiences and the feelings and images that we carry. Very much about epigenetics. So the energies from traumas in past generations can be passed along epigenetically, as can attitudes about things like prosperity. How about that? Now, my parents were children of the Depression, the Great Depression, right? Now, these days, if somebody came and said they had the Great Depression, they would be medicated. Okay? But we had a whole society of people that lived through the Great Depression, and it left quite an imprint. And I noticed those kinds of things, as I grew up, it became apparent to me that, oh, this isn't about now. This is about an imprint that was left before. So we live in a very abundant time, in a very abundant culture, don't we? But is it possible that famine and war and disease and economics and other traumas that significantly affected our ancestors have made their way into the current time? You want a really relevant example? Okay. How many people died in the Black Plague in the mid-1300s? 50% of Europe, 200 million people died. How many people died in the Spanish flu in 1918 to 1920? 50 million. 2.5 times the number that died in World War I. Yeah. How many people have died to date with COVID-19? Worldwide, about 6 million was a figure that I saw. Yeah. Okay, so 200 million to 50 million to 6 million with these pandemics. Now, I'm not saying pandemics are a good thing. I am saying that as a species, we're getting a lot better at dealing with them. And yet, look at the fear that came up. Look at the consciousness around that. Was that about today and about the reality of what was going on? Or is that stuff that started back in the 1300s and before and all the way through the Spanish flu and from ancestors that we don't even know that carried into the present moment? That is epigenetics. And I'm telling you, not only does it apply to things like diseases, it applies to our concepts around prosperity. You with me on this? Yeah. Maybe that's a little different framing. So as I become conscious of this kind of phenomenon, compassion comes up for me because I realize there's this really deep-seated stuff that we have to bring into consciousness and work at. And my response to that is, okay, this stops here. Whatever it is that's with that energy stops here. I am not going to pass this on. My kids and future generations are going to have plenty to deal with without me unconsciously passing stuff on. That is a genetic inheritance that just doesn't need to be passed. So, dealing with that, we have to talk about the F word. The F word is forgiveness. You guys thought I was losing it for a moment, didn't you? So what do we need to forgive to make room for joy and abundance and health and prosperity in our lives? Realizing that who has preceded us was doing the best they could at the time with what they had, but we don't have to hold on to the stuff from generations ago that left an imprint that just doesn't serve anymore. We can choose to let that go and come into the present. So, and like I said, forgiveness for me involves a lot of compassion, which is just another word for unconditional love. And that makes space for forgiveness and acceptance of that greater good that God has to offer. So I might actually be able to see it. So I might let go of some of my expectations. So now that we've talked about the F word, we need to talk about your BS, which is your belief system, right? Which is a very appropriate acronym for a lot of people's belief systems. So today, when you go out from church and people ask you, so what was discussed in church? You can say, well, we talked about giving and receiving and prosperity and compassion and the F word. And when people look aghast, before you tell them that the F word really means forgiveness, you can just tell them that they need to work on their own BS. Okay, I'm digressing, so it's time to finish. So let's close our eyes. And we'll give thanks for this day, for these teachings that bless us, for the prospering ideas of God that are offered to us in every moment. May we clear our minds and our hearts that we might receive all of the good that God offers. May we forgive all wounds from the past and step into this abundant present. Breathe in, breathe out, give and receive. Thank you, bless you. Namaste.